Dick Nite Spoons have been helping anglers catch fish since the 1940s. Salmon, steelhead, the many species of trout, kokanee, and many more. Here in the Northwest, the Dick Nite Spoon is a very essential part of our tackle box when we're fishing for these species of fish. Recently, I did a seminar at Holiday Sports in Burlington, Washington. I talk about 3 techniques that you can use to effectively fish for pink salmon and coho salmon in the fall. I talk about plunking, not only in a boat, but also on the bank. I talk about drift fishing the Dick Nite Spoon, and I also talk about trolling and back trolling the Dick Nite. Most importantly, we have some really good slow motion HD video of the Dick Nite Spoon to show you the proper action of the spoon that you want to achieve while you're trying to fish it. So stick around, watch the seminar, and I'll talk to you at the end. All right, excellent. My name is Doug St. Denis. My company name is Ridge to River Outdoors. I'm a full-time guide. I fish from the Skagit River down to the Columbia River for steelhead, salmon, and sturgeon. I also do some kokanee and trout trips and stuff. So what we're going to talk about today is using the Dick Nite Spoon. And it's really kind of funny. You look at this small spoon and people say, that spoon drives me nuts. I talk to a lot of people at sports shows and they're frustrated with this spoon. And generally it's because they don't allow the spoon to action properly, or they don't know where to fish it. Because if you think about it, this spoon, it's really, really little and it's really, really thin. Even the biggest spoon they have, a number 2, it's still a really small spoon. And so a lot of guys get frustrated, they don't know how to rig it up, and they don't know how to fish it. What I'm gonna show you guys today are 3 ways to fish it, okay? And I'm gonna show you HD video of what the spoon is actually supposed to look like when it's in the water, all right? So, Dick Nites are in fact one of the most versatile spoons on the market today. And I don't tell you that because I'm on Team Dick Nite. I tell you that because 95% of my fall salmon is because of this spoon. 95%. People fish with me, they want fish in the boat. What do I need to do? I need to produce fish. So number 1, I gotta find them. Number 2, we gotta use a technique that's gonna put fish in the boat. That's why I use this spoon. And long before I was on Dick's pro staff, I fished this spoon. And trust me, when I go through 300 or 400 a year, it's expensive, right? So when I hear people say, I lost 10, I'm like, really? 10? I go through 300 or 400 of them, okay? But that's what happens. When you want coho and you're on the river, where are the coho? In the bushes, in the sticks, in the timber. You want fish, you need to fish that stuff. You're gonna lose a lure or 2. But in the big scheme of things, it's not that as expensive lure that you're gonna lose as some of them that are out there. So, you know, Dick Nites, we had 2001, we had a world record humpy, right? Oh, you can see I like Dick Nites. I keep quite a few in my box. So in 2001, we had a world record humpy that was caught on the Snohomish River, right? Bob Hammond was the guide. That was a pretty interesting one. I didn't know this. Shad. The Oregon state record is 6 pounds, 6 ounces, caught on a Dick Nite. When we are looking for coho, we can find them with the Dick Nite. We can cover a lot of water. If we're fishing slack water or fast water, it doesn't really matter. It's very versatile. And of course, we all know August 1st on the Skagit River, humpy fishing. And it's a ton of fun. You know, whether you like to smoke that fish or you're gonna find other ways to cook it, you can fish super low in the river, and the Dick Nite Spoon is very effective. I will tell you that on this trip right here, where these guys are holding these fish, they were done in 20 minutes. 20 minutes, all right? And we'll talk about how you guys can do that. 20 minutes and they had their limit of fish. So let's talk about the techniques that we're going to, or I'll cover really quick, the techniques that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about plunking, okay? We're going to talk about drift fishing, and then we're also going to talk about trolling. These are the 3 techniques that I use to get people into fish when I'm using the Dick Nite, okay? So plunking setup. It's actually pretty easy. How many of you guys have plunked before? Okay, pretty good, about 50-50. How many have tried and said, forget it? Yeah, I know, it can be frustrating, isn't it? All right. Plunking is easy. In the setup, that when you use a plunking setup, you let the flow of the river dictate how the spoon acts. So you really don't have to do anything as far as, hey, is my lure actioning properly? You let the river do that. As long as you have flow, the Dick Nite is going to action properly, okay? You can get on the edge of some real slack water and your spoon may work and then fall off. It's because you're too close to that edge of that slack water. So stay out of that froggy water. Froggy water's for casting and retrieving, but plunking, you want to be in a travel lane, okay? In a travel lane, there's flow. Those fish want flow. I like to use an ultralight or a light action rod with a matched reel. Now, one of my favorite plunking setups is a G Loomis, is used with a G Loomis GL3 1141. Super light action rod. It's a ton of fun, okay? When a kid puts a fish on with a rod like this, he thinks he's got a monster. I also like these Akuma SSTs in the kokanee rods. And this is a super light action rod, a lot of action, okay? In fact, I'll keep this right over here because we're going to talk about this plunking setup. You just need to find the fish in the travel lane. If somebody asked me before we started this, they said, you know, I fish this body of water, it's real frustrating because it's hit and miss. Well, it's hit and miss because you need to find the travel lane, and it depends on what you're doing. So what do I want to do when I want to find where the fish are traveling if I'm new to the water? One of the first techniques I'm going to use is trolling, and we'll talk about trolling here in a little bit. But in order to plunk effectively, you need to find a travel lane. Even if you're on the bank, don't just go where everyone goes, go where people are catching fish, right? And look for the travel lane. If the travel lane's on the other side of the river, guess what? You're having to really cast over there to get in the travel lane, all right? So let's look at the plunking setup, and I have this rod set up here, but if we look at the plunking setup, this is how I set my rods up. On my main line, I have a 5mm bead, all right? That's the first thing I put on the main line. I put a 5mm bead because we all make mistakes and over-reel. I don't want to damage my rod tip with my gear. So I put a 5mm bead on. Then I put a number 10 snap swivel, right? Now, believe it or not, a lot of people go, wow, number 10, that's small. I use number 10s even when I'm coho fishing, even when I'm king fishing. Just recently, we've been doing a lot of fishing on the Skycomish River, steelhead and kings. 26-pound kings, no problem. Number 10. The breaking strength is a little higher than you would imagine. I also use a 4mm bead after the snap swivel, and then I put a barrel swivel on. The 4mm bead protects my knot to the barrel swivel. That's the only reason that's on there, because if you think about it, my weight on that snap swivel, it's banging against the barrel swivel. I want that knot to hold. The 4mm bead protects that knot, and it's a cheap investment, all right? At the end of my barrel swivel, I use a 5 to 6 foot leader, 5 to 6 foot leader. Now, I fish Iser line, and as far as the weight of the line, I fish 8-pound line, all right? Then I use a 2 to 4 foot dropper, depending on where I think the fish are running in relation to the bottom. So if I think they're a couple feet off the bottom, I run a 2-foot dropper. If I think they're a little higher, I run a 4-foot dropper. Generally what I will do is I'll start off with a 3-foot leader. I'm sorry, a 3-foot dropper. That's where I start. I'll either shorten or maybe I'll pull it off and put one a little longer. But that's generally where I start, okay? On the end of that, I'm gonna run cannonball. If I'm in a boat, right? If I'm on the bank, and some of you may be on the bank, you're going to want to run pyramid, okay? You're in a boat, you're in the middle of the river, your plunking setup is straight back behind the boat, right? Or maybe off to the side, depending upon how many rods you have. You don't need to worry about that weight going anywhere, okay? Because you're only gonna let 45 degree, you're only gonna put enough line out to be 45 degrees out, and we'll get to that in a second. The reason you use pyramids on the bank is because you don't want your setup going down river. Cannonballs will roll. These don't. So if you're on the bank and you're plunking, use pyramids, not cannonballs. Because these will grab and your plunking setup will stay in the river in the correct place that you want it to be. Okay? So, yes?
Why fluorocarbon on your sink?
Okay, the question is, why am I using fluorocarbon on my dropper for the weight? All right. Fluorocarbon's more stiff, right? That's the bottom line, it's stiff. So in the time that you're casting and retrieving, or you have a fish on, that stiffer fluorocarbon dropper stays away from your leader, right? If you don't want to buy the fluorocarbon, use 15-pound test, right? You need a stiffer monofilament for your dropper so you don't get wrapping. Because what you don't want, especially if you're on the bank and you're plunking and you're trying to get in that travel lane that's 40 yards away, you don't want to cast and now your Dick Nite and your weight have twisted up. Because as soon as it lands in the water, it's a mess. That's the only reason I use the fluorocarbon. Now, the bank setup for plunking, it's essentially the same as the other setup. You really need to play with your dropper, okay? And you're gonna really wanna play with your weight. When I use lead for my setups, I only use enough lead to touch the bottom. If my weight is not touching the bottom, it's constantly up because of the flow of the river, I put something a little heavier on. I generally will start with a 2. I have fished on the lower Skagit River up to 4 ounces to keep my lead just in one spot. Just depends on what the flow's doing. Don't use too much. You want the whole setup. This is an ultralight setup. Stay as ultralight as you can. Just use enough weight to touch the bottom, okay? Now, let's set this out of the way here. I'll talk to you guys here. Actually, I won't jump ahead. We just talked about the weight. Okay, we'll get to it all here in just a second. If you're in a boat, how many of you are in a boat? Whew, that's a lot. Okay, if you're in a boat, this is really important. Only put your line out at 45 degrees. Okay? So it doesn't matter if your line is 35 feet or 65 feet away from the boat, you want the line at 45 degrees. Here's why. We have a dropper. We have a leader, right? We're trying to touch the bottom and get a certain amount of distance off the bottom of the river bottom, right? If I take a 3-foot dropper and a 5-foot leader and I put it at 45 degrees, I'm gonna be right at about 3 feet off the bottom. If I cast it out there, now my line is more flat. Here's the leader, here's the dropper, they come together. The angle of departure decreases. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so essentially, with this setup here,